Great powers almost never die from invasion. They die from internal mismatch. Too much complexity, not enough coherence. Over the last decade, the United States has looked less like a confident hegemon and more like a system under constant stress. Contested elections, political lawfare, institutional showdowns, and a population that no longer agrees on basic facts. In this episode of Global Power Shifts, we're going to treat America's internal fracture not as a culture war drama, but as a structural problem in how US governance handles complexity and power, and then ask what that means for the rest of the world. We'll use two of my core frameworks: the governance wave function, or GWF, which looks at how complex systems break down, and CPP, which looks at how leaders and institutions actually get and protect their power. And if you want the deep, on the ground version of this story, my recent book, Why Trump is Right and Almost Everyone Else is Wrong, is the field manual for one of the main fault lines we'll be talking about today. Here's what we're going to do in this episode. First, we'll use the governance wave function, GWF, to show why American governance is jamming under its own complexity. Too many layers, too many rules, and not enough bandwidth to keep everything coherent. Second, we'll use CPP, a framework for understanding where people and institutions really get their power and what they'll do to keep it, to map what I call the twin civil wars: the institutional civil war and the informational civil war. Third, we'll build three scenarios over the next 12 to 24 months for how this internal fracture reshapes US power outward. And we'll attach 30, 60, and 90-day checkpoints so you can see which trajectory we're actually on, instead of just collecting hot takes. To understand the fracture, we start with the US as a governance stack. The governance wave function, or GWF, asks a simple question. Given the population, the number of layers, and the volume of signals, does this system still have the bandwidth to process reality and respond coherently? In the American case, you've got street level reality at the bottom: people, businesses, crises, then layer after layer: local, state, federal, agencies, courts, parties, media platforms, NGOs, and global commitments stacked on top. Each layer adds rules, procedures, and veto points, but it also adds delay, information decay, and internal conflict. At a certain point, the system isn't really governing, it's just reacting late. GWF gives us a vocabulary for the failure modes you see every day. First, bandwidth exhaustion. The signal load: crises, cultural fights, legal battles, foreign conflicts, simply outruns the system's capacity to process and respond. Second, rule density and overlap. Rules pile on faster than they're removed, and every layer claims some piece of the same problem. That's how you get contradictory policies and selective enforcement. Third, the combination of delay and contradiction creates policy whiplash. Every election, every court decision, every vial clip can yank the system in a different direction. At this point, actors inside and outside the US stop treating American policy as a coherent strategy and start treating it as a noisy average of internal power struggles. This is where my book comes in. And why Trump is right and almost everyone else is wrong, I treat Trump less as the cause of American fracture and more as a stress test on an already overloaded system. When governance stack like this meets a leader who refuses to play by its implicit rules, you find out very quickly where bandwidth is already saturated, where rule density has made consistent enforcement impossible, and where institutions are more interested in preserving themselves than in serving the public. That's why Trump becomes a diagnostic tool in the book. He forces every major actor, agencies, parties, media, corporate platforms to reveal their real incentives and their real level of confidence in the system. With that context, let's talk about the twin civil wars. And we're still wearing both the GWF and CPP lenses here. The institutional civil war is a fight over who actually runs the system: elected officials, permanent bureaucracy, courts, or corporate platforms. It's all about control of the steering wheel. The informational civil war is a fight over what reality even is and who gets to define it: legacy media, partisan media, platforms, intelligence leaks, influencers, or raw footage from someone's phone. Together, these two wars mean that the US is no longer arguing mainly about policy, it's arguing about legitimacy and narrative. That's a very different problem. CPP is my framework for power sources and behavior. The core idea is simple. CPP asks two things: where does the actor really get its power from? And how much is it willing to sacrifice to keep that power? Permanent bureaucracy and agencies get most of their power from position and structure, formal roles, procedures, long term continuity. When they feel threatened, they act to protect the institution and their own roles first. Elected officials and parties need both personal influence and formal office. They live in permanent campaign mode. So survival pressure is always high. Courts and the lawfare ecosystem officially get power from rules and processes. But in a politicized environment, they end up reacting to the narratives. Who will view this decision as legitimate? Who will treat it as an attack? Through the CPP lens, the institutional civil war is set on power defense moves by actors who feel their power sources are under threat. On the informational side, you no longer have one broadcast reality with minor disagreements. You have competing reality stacks. One stack is legacy media plus official government statements. Another is openly partisan media ecosystems. A third is platforms, influencers, and raw viral clips. A fourth is leaks and inside sources that claim to show the real story behind the curtain. Each stack uses the same events, but encodes them differently. And each stack has its own audience that treats the others as propaganda. That makes coordinated action at home harder and coordinated signaling abroad almost impossible. So what does all this mean for global power shifts? First, internal fracture narrows the US decision space. The more the twin civil wars heat up, the less room there is for long, complex operations. The system has shorter attention spans and lower tolerance for prolonged campaigns or unclear outcomes. Second, everyone else has noticed. Allies and partners now treat US commitments as conditional on domestic politics. They hedge, diversify, and quietly plan for sudden shifts. Third, rivals probe for windows where internal conflict is high and external discipline is low. They don't need the US to collapse, they just need it distracted, divided, and reactive. With that structure in mind, let's sketch 3 scenarios over the next 12 to 24 months. These are grounded in GWF, the system's capacity, and CPP, the power behavior of the key actors. Scenario 1 is a managed dysfunction. This is the most likely case. Internal conflict stays loud, institutions keep fighting, but the system muddles through. The US remains noisy and inconsistent, but still able to project power in fits and starts. Scenario 2 is fragmentation front and center. A major domestic shock, legal, political, or social, pulls internal conflict to the front of the stage and forces visible retrenchment abroad. America turns inward, and the map adjusts. Scenario 3 is a hard reset and realignment, either through political realignment or governance reform. Some parts of the GWS stack get simplified. Fewer overlapping rules, clearer trade-offs, the internal posture becomes narrower but more credible. To make more of this than just concepts, we anchor each scenario in checkpoints. At 30 days, you watch the signaling layer, legal escalations, major protests, sudden narrative shifts around key cases, or elections. These tell you how intense the twin civil wars are becoming. At 60 days, you look for policy wobble, visible reversals, freezes, or conflicting signals on major external commitments, sanctions, military aid, treaty initiatives. At 90 days, you look for structural moves, resignations, realignments inside parties or agencies, and explicit changes in doctrine, budgets, or alliance posture. That's where the GWF and CPP logic stops being abstract and shows up as different behavior in the real world. Stepping back, here's the bigger point. America's internal fracture isn't about bad feelings or partisan memes. It's a structural challenge in how a very complex system of governance manages bandwidth, rules, legitimacy, while trying to run an empire scale foreign policy. The rest of the world has already adjusted. Allies hedge against volatility, rivals probe for windows, neutral and middle powers try to stay close enough to benefit, but far enough to survive a hard swing. In this episode, we've leaned on GWF to understand the system's overload and CPP to understand how actors fight to keep their power inside that overload. If you want to go deeper on the US side of this story, how these fractures showed up around Trump as a stress test on the system, that's exactly what my book, Why Trump is Right and Almost Everyone Else is Wrong, is about. It's written for people who care more about structure than slogans. In this episode, I hope I helped you see the pattern a bit more clearly. Subscribe, please. Share it with someone who still thinks this is just about personalities. And I'll see you in the next episode of Global Power Shifts.